Well, on Monday, May 1st, American blogger and outspoken critic of the Ukraine war, Gonzalo Lira, was arrested in Ukraine by the SBU. He is now since continued to be detained. And the Ukrainian government says the reason for his detention was because he was actually an outspoken critic. They say this is illegal in Ukraine. They actually released a statement after he was arrested, and they said that the SBU detained a foreign blogger in Kharkiv who denied the crimes of the Rashists and insulted Ukrainian defenders. The security service gathered evidence against a foreign blogger who publicly justified the armed aggression of the Russian Federation and spread fakes about the war in Ukraine, is what they've essentially accused him of. The crime of speech, of speaking his mind about the war, is what ended up getting Gonzalo Lira arrested. Here are just some of the types of statements he made on his YouTube channel. He does Twitter. He's all over the place. This is just one example of some of his comments.
See how it works? See what the Zelensky regime is doing? They're deliberately putting civilians in harm's way, either by putting weapons in their hands that they are incapable of competently handling, or else putting heavy weaponry in civilian population zones, so that the Russians inadvertently will kill some civilian, and it will lead to a great photo op that will benefit the Zelensky regime. That is evil. It's as simple as that. And I am in Ukraine right now under the authority of the Zelensky regime, a regime that consistently persecutes any critic of it. And I am a foreigner in this country. And I'm saying this publicly, and I don't give a f who sees it. And if the Zelensky regime sees this and arrests me and throws me God knows where, well, then you know. And I don't give a f because you have to call out evil when you see it. And this is fucking evil. Simple as that.
So since then, we do have some updates. And Liam Cosgrove from the Gray Zone actually went and asked the State Department about whether or not they're doing anything to get this American released from Ukrainian jails after speaking his mind, something that we're able to do in this country. Watch this clip.
Thanks, Liam Cosgrove with Epic Times. So this was a couple weeks ago, but I haven't seen an official statement on it. A U.S. citizen who was residing in Ukraine has been arrested, and that he was a California-born man. He was in the past like a Business Insider contributor, and he had a YouTube channel. He was an outspoken critic of Zelensky's regime. The Ukrainian SBU released a press release saying he was arrested for justifying Putin's invasion. So ultimately, it added up to speech. And I spoke with Congressman Ted Lieu, Democrat, and he said he urges the State Department to engage its authorities to, work out some sort of negotiation to get him released. So are you guys aware of this? How do we feel about our allies, detaining U.S. citizens for speech abroad?
I will say in general that we're aware of the report. We obviously support the exercise of freedom of speech anywhere in the world, and I'll leave it at that.
So you guys aren't working to get him released?
I'm going to leave my comments where I just left them. Callie.
So there you have it. The State Department isn't seemingly doing very much. Well, here with us now is Gonzalo Lira's father, obviously desperate to get his son out of the situation that he is in. Mr. Gonzalo Lira Sr., welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Can you give us any update? What is happening with your son?
Thank you, Kim, for giving me the opportunity of being able to speak on behalf of my son. He was illegally detained. He's an American citizen living for many years in Ukraine due to the fact that he married a Ukrainian lady and has his two sons, a boy and a girl, living in Ukraine. My son was an outspoken blogger against the government of Zelensky. He never said anything bad about the Ukrainian people. In fact, he talked on many occasions as to how nice they were and how well he felt living in Ukraine. His only problem and beef was with the Ukrainian Zelensky regime and the fact that the information of the war, insofar as Gonzalo was concerned, was totally wrong. They were just lies. And he said this from the beginning of the war. As you showed part of his blogger videos, this was at the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, when Zelensky gave weapons, high-performance weapons, to people that had been in jail and freed them to have Ukrainians armed against potential Russians in the city of Kiev. Gonzalo was caught in Kiev at the time the war started. And after that, he went back to his hometown, Kharkiv. He reported, I saw a video when he was walking in the middle of shootouts in Kharkiv. He was reporting what he saw. He was reporting what he felt. Gonzalo never espoused for a coup d'etat, for having somebody killed. He always criticized the way the Zelensky regime was informing the war. And that is sanctioned by the human rights in the United Nations, signed last December 1948, that clearly says, insofar as freedom of speech, everyone has the right to freedom of expression. The right shall include freedom to hold opinions and to receive and impart information and ideas without interference by public authorities and regardless of the frontier. I'm very disappointed at the US government, and in particular, the State Department. When you read in the American embassies throughout the world, they have statements in the embassy that calls for any American citizen that could be imprisoned in a foreign nation, the embassy would come into his help at the earliest possible time. The chief of Foreign American Services in Ukraine, he told me that he had had a video conference, but that video conference was almost 3 weeks after my son had been detained. I am very puzzled because it also states that the embassies will take care of US citizens being in prison. My son is no delinquent. My son is using the First Amendment of the US Constitution, the right of free speech. He exercised his rights. Furthermore, the embassy states that they will take care of anything, any imprisoned US citizen by permanently visiting him, organizing family visits. My son Kim has been detained for the last 34 days. We do not know where he is. We do not know whether he's been tortured. We do not know whether they have killed him. And this is something that the USA cannot condone and cannot keep quiet. This has to move the world. I'm an 80-year-old father. Zelensky is the age of my son. He also has family. He also has 2 kids or 3, whatever. I don't want my son to leave my grandchildren without a father. As I said before, I beg you, Zelensky, I implore you, Biden, release my son, deport him if you wish from Ukraine, but allow him to be free and to have me in my few years to come of my life to live in peace.
Mr. Lira, have you spoken to his attorney? Does he have a lawyer?
Kim, the most outrageous thing is the following. The jailers gave him an attorney. He was able to communicate extra-officially. We cannot say this much in public. He didn't contact his family. He contacted his Chilean attorney and an attorney in the USA. The jailers gave him Ukrainian attorneys. The embassy has the right to visit him, not video conference, Kim. Personally visit the imprisonment American citizens and to give them local attorneys for their defense. Gonzalo has been accused of Mickey Mouse laws, in my opinion, because the human rights, the freedom of speech precludes any local law. If it did not, this free speech is a law of the universe, is a law of the world. If any country puts on laws like Ukraine did last March, then what we're looking at is a dictatorship. And the USA cannot support any more dictators. It has been enough blood in this world. I've seen too many battles. I've seen too many wars, Kim. And now I'm fighting for my son. This is my last battle of my life, and I can't lose it. I have to win my son back. So that's why, Kim, I appreciate this opportunity you have given me. But the world should move. My son is no delinquent. My son hasn't killed anyone. My son hasn't threatened anyone. My son has given his opinion, right or wrong. As I recall the great philosopher Voltaire, I wholly disapprove what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. This is what I'm referring, Kim. The right of freedom of speech. The first time I learned that when I arrived in the USA back in the 60s, I will never forget Mario Savio, UC Berkeley, 1965. I was a sophomore at UCLA. And that Mario Savio fought for freedom of speech. Well, where is that freedom of speech? Zelensky, my son was against your regime. He didn't like your politics. He wasn't in agreement with your politics. But by far, he's a man that would bring you danger to you. He was only expressing an opinion. How can you do this? How can you put him in prison? What are you showing to the world? And you, Mr. Biden, you're making a fool of the USA. Honestly, you're disappointing me. I voted for you, but you're a big disappointment. You are not defending a US citizen who has the rights under the First Amendment. And we all know what you're doing in this war, Mr. Biden. You are behind this war. And you know the worst of it all. That is the country of my children, grandchildren. They're living there. And you're helping the Russians to destroy Ukraine. We're not going to have anything left after this war stops, there will be no Ukraine. This is going to be worse than Germany at the end of the Second World War. And
Mr.
what did
Lira,
we win? Nothing.
Mr. Lira,
Yes,
have
Kim.
you spoken to Gonzalo's wife and children? How are they holding up?
No, I have no way of communicating, nor I do not know where they are. I have two grandchildren. Veronica's 10 and Ramon is 8. The little children. I don't know. I haven't seen them for years. I don't know where they are. I don't know where she is.
And is the Chilean government, from my understanding, Gonzalo is he is a dual citizen of both the United States and Chile. Has the Chilean government stepped in and done anything, since seemingly the U.S. government doesn't seem to be doing much?
Let me give you a background, if I may, very short background. When Gonzalo was born in Los Angeles at the St. Joseph Hospital in Burbank, when he was 8 years old, we came back to Chile for 3 years. When we arrived in Chile after a few months, my son was a wetback in Chile because my wife didn't know the paperwork that had to be done. Therefore, when we received notice from the Ministry of Interior in Chile, he became a Chilean citizen. But he has that dual citizenship throughout most of his life, as a matter of fact, because we went back to the States after 3 years in Chile. But that's why he has two nationalities, or dual nationality. In so far as your question, the Chilean government is a leftist government headed by Mr. Boric. Shameful. They are the descendants of the people that fought Pinochet, the dictator that was in Chile for 17 years. He descends from the politicians that were the first enemies of Pinochet. He's a leftist, as I said. He hasn't done a thing to help my son. Nothing. The worst of it all, Kim, I am an Occidental man. I believe in justice. I believe in freedom. The Russians are using the American silence to hit back at them. The Russian ambassador in Santiago, Chile, made a note of protest to the chancellery in Santiago as to why Chile hasn't done anything to help out a Chilean citizen. But guess what? The same thing they're doing in the USA, calling the states, what are you doing? He's an American citizen. Aren't you the ones that throughout the world fight for freedom? And when you have to show freedom, you just don't know, you just don't do anything. Isn't that awkward? Isn't it awkward, Kim, that my son was detained 4 days after his last video conference, which, for the first time, Gonzalo went very strong against Biden and called his son Hunter Biden, who's being investigated right now. And Gonzalo said, Biden is not going to last his tenure. He's going to have to leave the presidency in the hands of Kamala Harris, who is not one of Gonzalo's favorites. But Kim, I wondered, the SBU, which is a police force in Ukraine, knew exactly where Gonzalo was living. As a matter of fact, I'm sure you know, they kidnapped Gonzalo last year on the 15th of April, and they held him till the 22nd for a full week. Then they throw him out. They took his passport, so he couldn't leave Ukraine. And they knew where he lived. And his speech continued the same speech as before against the Zelensky regime. But all of a sudden, my son, on the 27th of April, he spoke very strong against Mr. Biden and what he's doing in the presidency, politically speaking, and his problem with his son that may also carry him down, according to my son. And that was an opinion. That's not a threat. His opinion was he won't finish his tenure in the presidency. Now, you cannot sanction that, but it makes me wonder, why was he arrested 4 days after that video? Why wasn't he arrested if he was speaking so badly against Zelensky, which as a matter of fact, he was doing every conference he had on video? Why was he detained 4 days after speaking so bad about Biden? Is the U.S. behind? Why the U.S. Embassy hasn't visited my son? Why the State Department hasn't come out and spoken and asked this Zelensky to free my son? Why are they keeping quiet? I'm beginning to wonder, Kim, because I live in a free country which is called Chile. And my opinion, the U.S. could be behind this.
Well, it is a very good question because you're absolutely right. Gonzalo had been speaking out against the war for a very long time, really since the war began. So the way he was speaking did not change. They knew where he was, as you mentioned before. He had been detained earlier, a year earlier. So it is definitely, there's a lot of questions around why now, why detain him now, and why detain him for as long as they have at this point. Now you're looking at 5 weeks, going on 6 weeks. So this is definitely, you've got a lot of really great questions. Mr. Lira, thank you so much for being here today and giving us a little bit more insight into what is going on. We definitely are very alarmed, very concerned that somebody speaking their opinion would be detained in this way, especially with the U.S. government saying the reason why we're supporting Ukraine, the reason why we're giving them all this money is because they're the bastion of freedom and democracy in Eastern Europe. And this is just showcasing that that is not the case. In fact, that an American citizen is not able to speak his opinion without being thrown in jail and being detained without his family even knowing where he is. This is every journalist, every opinion blogger, anybody who's an American should be outraged by this, whether they agree with Gonzalo or not on his opinions. And he had many opinions I did not agree with, but that doesn't matter. What matters is we should be allowed to express our opinions without having this sort of authoritarian dictatorship consequence of being thrown into prison. So, Mr. Lira, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
May I finish? Him. I have been remembering a great American man, a great American soldier, President Eisenhower. Please go back into your books. His last speech, hours before finishing his presidency and giving his president to President John Kennedy, he spoke to to the American public. And one of the things he said was, I am afraid of the military industry in our nation. By now, they're employing 3 million citizens. I'm afraid that we will continue the military machinery. And that was spoken by a former general, 5-star general, a victorious man. I always admired him, Kim. And look what the USA has become. And this is my opinion. The US has become a country that builds military weapons for the wars of the world, has invaded countries using the military industry to sell armaments throughout the world. Well, a country that builds military weapons and is losing the world fight of producing non-military goods is a country that needs wars in the world to sell its products. I'm afraid, and I'm very disappointed, how the last governments in the last 20, 30 years, I was lucky, Kim, that I lived the best years of the USA, the beginning of the 60s, even having a Cold War. It was the best time of the USA, the 50s and the 60s, Kim. I know Americans, counterparts of my age, know what I'm talking about. Vietnam was the beginning of our destruction, our social destruction. I had fellow students, even one of them that became a friend of mine. He went to Vietnam and died. I was classified because I went to the board and I enlisted, but I was pulled 3A. I was married, and at that time I had deferment of Gonzalo. Gonzalo was born in 1968. He saved me, literally saved me from the war.
Well,
I
Mr. Lira,
cannot accept him to have him in prison. By agree or disagree with him, he only gave out his opinions.
Mr. Lira, we are definitely going to be watching,
I
continuing to
thank
follow
you.
the story, and we feel for you very deeply with what you're going through and with what Gonzalo, your son, is going through. And thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And Kim, we need people like you. We need the George Galloways, the Kim Iverson, because we have to fight for peace, for freedom of individuals. We cannot continue wars, Kim. There is another one in the horizon. Hopefully God will prevent a war between China and the United States. I love the United States. I love its people. I don't like the government, Kim. Thank you again. And may God have mercy on my son.
So Trump recently said, quote, "Our currency is crashing and will soon no longer be the world standard, which will be our greatest defeat, frankly, in 200 years. And you know what? He's right. And it's our own fault. Bullying and using the dollar to get what we want geopolitically has caused nation after nation to ditch out. And the latest is Venezuela's Maduro, who's been visiting Saudi Arabia. And, you know, BRICS is just getting stronger. Venezuela's saying they want to join it. And the fact is, there is one asset that has withstood famine, wars, political and economic upheaval dating back to biblical times, gold. And you can own it in a tax-sheltered retirement account with the help of Birch Gold. Birch Gold will help you convert an existing IRA or 401k, maybe from a previous employer, into an IRA in gold. And the best part, you don't have to pay a penny out of pocket. Just visit birchgold.com/Kim for your free info kit. They're going to hold your hand through the whole process. So think about this: when currencies fail or when they just start to really tank, gold is a safe haven. How much more time does the dollar have? Protect your savings with gold. Birch Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of happy customers. So visit birchgold.com/Kim to get your free info kit on gold. Again, visit birchgold.com/Kim.